Twilight, Chapter 7 Nightmare. I told Charlie I had a lot of homework to do and that I don't want anything to eat. There was a basketball game on that he was excited about, though, of course, I had no idea what was special about it, so he was not aware of anything unusual in my face or tone. Once in my room, I locked the door. I dug through my desk until I found my old headphones and I plugged them onto my little CD player. I picked up a CD that Phil had given me to me for Christmas. It was one of his favorite brands, but they used a little too much bass and shrieking for my tastes. I propped it into place and lay down on my bed. I put on the headphones, hit play, and turned up the volume until it hurts my ears. I closed my eyes, but the light still intruded. So I added a pillow over the half of my face. I concentrated, very careful, on the music, trying to understand the lyrics, to unravel the complicated drum patterns. By the third time I could listen to through the CD, I know all the words to the chorus at least. I was surprised to find that I really did like the band after all. Once I got past the blaring noise, I could have to thank Phil again. And it worked. The shattering beats made it impossible for me to think, which was the whole purpose of the exercise. I listened to the CD again and again until I was singing along with all the songs, until finally I fell asleep. I opened my eyes to a familiar place, aware in some corner of my consciousness that I was dreaming. I recognized the green light of the forest. I could hear the waves crashing against the rocks somewhere nearby, and I know that if I found the ocean, I could be able to see the sun. I was trying to follow the sound, but then Jacob Black was there, tugging on my hand, pulling me back towards the backlist of the part of the forest. Jacob, what is wrong? I asked. His face was frightened and he yanked with all of his strength against his resistance. I don't want to go into the dark. Run, Bella. You have to run, he whispered, terrified. This way, Bella. I recognized Mike's voice calling out of the gloomy heart of the trees, but I could not see him. Why? I asked, still pulling against Jacob's scraps, despite how to find the sun. But Jacob let go of my hand and yielded, suddenly shaking. Failing to the dim forest floor, he twitched on the ground as I watched in horror. Jacob! I screamed, but he was gone. In his place was a large red brown wolf with black eyes. The wolf faced away from me, pointing towards the shore, the hair of the black of his shoulders bristling, low growls issuing from between his exposed fangs. Bella, run! Mike cried out again from behind me, but I don't turn. I was watching a light coming towards me from the beach, and then Edward stepped out from the trees, his skin faintly glowing, his eyes black and dangerous. He held up one hand and beckoned me to come to him. The wolf growled at my feet. I took a step forward towards Edward. He smiled then, and his teeth was sharp, pointed. Trust me, he purred. I took another step. The wolf launched himself across the space between me and the vampire, fangs aiming for the jungler. No, I screamed, wrenching upright out of my bed. My sudden movement caused the headphones to pull the CD player off the beside table and it clattered to the wooden floor. My light was still on, and I was sitting fully dressed on the bed with my shoes on. I glanced disoriented at the clock of my dresser. It was 5:30 in the morning. I groaned, fell back, and rolled over onto my face, kicking off my boots. I was too uncomfortable to get anywhere near the sleep though. I rolled back over and unbuttoned my jeans, yanking them off awkwardly as I tried to stay horizontal. I could feel the braid in my hair, an uncomfortable ridge along the back of my skull. I turned onto my side and ripped the rubber band out, quickly combing through the pails with my finger. I pulled the pillow back over my eyes. It was all no use, of course. My subconscious had raked up exactly the images I could been trying so desperately to avoid. I was going to have and face them now. I sat up. My head spun for a minute as the blood flowed downwards. First thing first, I thought to myself, happy to put it off as long as possible. I grabbed my bathroom bag. The shower don't last near as long as I hoped it though. Even taking the time to blow dry my hair, I was soon out of the things to do in the bathroom. Wrapped in a towel, I crossed back to my room. I could not tell if Charlie was still asleep or if he had already left. I went to look out of my window, and the courier was gone, fishing again. I dressed slowly in my most comfy sweats and then made my bed, something I never did. I could not put it off any longer. I went to my desk and switched on my old computer. I hated using the internet here. My modem was sadly outdated. My free service substandard. Just dialing up took so long that I decided to go get myself a bowl of cereals while I waited. I ate slowly, chewing each bite with care. When I was done, I washed the bowl and spoon, dried them, and put them away. My feet dragged as I climbed the stairs. I went to my CD players, first picking it up off the floor and placing it peacefully in the center of the table. I pulled out the headphones and put them away in the desk drawer. Then I turned the CD on, turning it down to the point where it was background noise. With another sign, I turned to my computer. Naturally, the screen was covered in pop up ads. I sat in my hard folding chair and began closing all the little windows. Eventually, I made it to my favorite search engine. I shot down a few more pop ups and then typed in one word vampire. I took an infinitely long time, of course. When the results came up, there was a lot to sift through. Everything from the movies and TV shows to role play games, underground metal, and gothic cosmetic complaints. Then I found a promising site, Vampires A to Z. I waited impatiently for it to load, quickly clicking close in each ad that flashed across the screen. Finally, the screen was finished. Simply white background with black text. Academic looking. Two quotes greeted me on the homepage. Throughout the vast shadow world of ghosts and demons, there was no figure so terrible, no figure so dear and abandoned, yet delight with such fearful fascination as the vampire who is himself neither ghost nor demon, but yet who partakes the dark natures and possesses the mysterious and terrible qualities of both. Rave Montegros Summers. If there is in the world a well attested account, it is that of vampires. Nothing is lacking. Official reports, affidavits of well known people, of surgeons, of priests, of magistrates. The judicial proof is most complete. And with all that, who is there? Who believes in vampires? Rouses. The rest of the site was an alphabetical listing of all the different myths of vampires held throughout the world. The first I clicked on, the Danga, was a Philippine vampire supposedly responsible for planting a taro on the island long ago. The myth continued that the Dang worked with the humans for many years, but the partnership ended one day when a woman cut her finger and Dang sucked her wound, enjoying the taste so much that it drained her blood completely of blood. I read carefully through the descriptions, looking for anything that sounded familiar, let alone pleasable. It seems that most vampires myth created around beautiful women as demons and children as victims. They also seems like constructs created to explain away the high mortality rates of our young children and to give men an excuse for infidelity. Many of the stories involved bodiless spirits and warning against improper burials. There was not much that sounded like the movies I could see, and only a very few, like the Headbrew Estrie and the Polish Yupa, who were even preoccupied with drinking blood. Only three entries really caught my attention: the Roman Varacolic, a powerful undead being who could appear as a beautiful pale skinned human, the Solvak Nelepsky. The creature, so strong and fast it could mascara an entire village in the single hour after midnight, and one other, the Strigoni Benefic. About this last three was only one brief sentence. Strigonic Benfic, an Italian vampire said to be one of the sites of godness and a mortal enemy of all the evil vampires. It was a relief that One small entry, the one myth among hundreds that claim the existence of good vampires. Overall, though, there was a little that concurred the Jacob stories or my own observations. I could had a little catalogy in my mind as I could read and carefully compared it with each myth. Speed, strength, beauty, pale skin, eyes that shift color, and then Jacob's criteria, blood drinkers, enemies of the werewolves, cold skin, and immortal. There were few myths that matched even one factor, and then another problem, one that I could remember from the small number of scary movies that I could see and was backed up by today's reading. Vampires could not come out in the daytime, the sun could burn them to the cinder. They slept in coffins all day and came out only at night. Aggravated, I snapped out of the computer's main power switch, not waiting to shut things down properly. Through my irritation, I felt overwhelming embarrassment. It was all so stupid. I was sitting in my room researching vampires. That was wrong with me. I decided that most of the blame belonged on the doorstep of the town of Folks and the entire Southern Olympic Peninsula, for that matter. I had to get out of the house, but there was nowhere I wanted to go that don't involve a 3 day arrive. I pulled on my boots anyway, unclear where I was headed, and went downstairs. I charged into a raincoat without checking the weather and stormed out the door. It was overcast, but not raining yet. I ignored my truck and started east on foot, angling across Charlie's yard towards the ever encroaching forest. It didn't take long till I was deep enough for the house and the road to be invincible, for the only sound to be squash of the damp earth under my feet and the sudden crashes of the chase. There was a thin ribbon of a trail that led through the forest here, or I could not risk wandering on my own like this. My sense of directions was hopeless. I could get lost in much less helpful surroundings. The trail got deeper and deeper into the forest, to mostly east, as far as I could tell. It sneaked around the skeeter squares and the hemlocks, the yaks and the maples. I only vaguely knew the names of the trees around me, and all I knew was due to Charlie pointing them out to me from the cruiser window in early days. There were many I don't know, and others I could not be sure about because there were no cover in green pastures. I followed the trail as long as my anger at myself pushed me forward. At the step to ebb, I slowed. A few drops of moisture trickled down from the canopy above me, but I could not be certain if it was beginning to rain or if it was simply pools left over from yesterday, held high in the leaves above me, slowly dripping their way back to the earth. A recently fallen tree, I know it, was recently because it was not entirely corrupted in moss, rested against the trunk of one of her sisters, creating a shelter little bench just a few safe feet off the trail. I stepped over to the fence and sat carefully, making sure my jacket was between the damp seat and my clothes wherever they touched, and leaned my hood head back against the living tree. This was the wrong place to have come. I should have known, but where else was there to go? The forest was deep green and far too much like the scene in the last night's dreams to allow for the peace of mind. Now that there was no longer the sound of my soggy footsteps, the silence was freezing. The birds were quiet too, the drops increasing in frequency, so it must be raining above. The fern stood higher than my head. Now that I was seated, and I know someone could walk by on the path 3 feet away and not see me. Here in the trees, it was much easier to believe the uproads that embarrassed me indoors. Nothing had changed in the forest for thousands of years, and all the myths and legends of different 100 different lands seemed much more likely in the green haze that they had in my clear cut bedroom. I forced myself to focus on the two most vital questions I had to answer, but I did so unwillingly. First, I had to decide if it was possible that what Jacob had said about the Cullens could be true. Immediately, my mind responded with the resounding negative. It was silly and morbid to entertain such ridiculous notions, but what then? I asked myself. There was no rational explanation for how I was alive at this moment. I listened it again in my head, the things I could observe myself. The impossible speed and strength, the eye color shifting from black to gold, and again black. The inhuman beauty, the pale, frigid skin, and more small things that registered slowly how they never seems to eat. The disturbing grace with which they moved, and the way we sometimes spoke, the unfamiliar candies and phrases that better fit the style of turn on the century novel than that of a 21st century classroom. He had skipped class the day we had done blood typing. He had not said no to the beach trip till he heard where we were going. He seems to know what everyone around him was thinking except me. He had told me he was a villain, dangerous. Could the Cullens be vampires? Well, there was something outside the possibility of rational justification was taking place in front of my incredulous eyes. Whether it be Jacob's cold ones or my own superhero theory, Edward Cullen was not human. He was something more. So then, maybe, that could have to be my answer for now. And then the most important question of all, what was I am going to do if it was true? If Edward was a vampire, I could hardly make myself think the words. Then what should I do? Involving someone else was definitely out. I could not even believe myself anyone I told could have me committed. Only two options seemed practical. The first was to take his advice, to be smart, to avoid him as much as possible, to cancel our plans, to go back to ignoring him as far as I was able, to pretend there was an impenetrable thick glass wall between us in the one class where we were forced together, to tell him to leave me alone and mean it this time. I was gripped in a sudden agony of despair as I considered that alternative. My mind rejected the pain, quickly skipping on to the next option. I could do nothing different. After all, he was something. Sin's sister. He could done nothing to hurt me so far. In fact, I could be a dent in jailer's fender if he had not acted so quickly. So quickly. I argued with myself that it might have been sheer reflex, but if it was a reflex to save lives, how bad could he be? I retreated. My head spun around in answers circles. There was one thing I was sure of. I was sure of anything. The dark Edward in my dream last night was a reflection only of my fear of the word Jacob had spoken, and not Edward himself. Even so, when I could scream out in terror at the werewolf lung, it was not fear for the wolf that brought the cry of no to my lips. It was a fear that he could be harmed, even as he called to me with sharp edged fangs. I feared for him. And I know in that I had my answer. I don't know if there were ever was a choice, really. I was already in too deep. Now that I know, if I know, I could do anything about my frightened secret. Because when I thought of him, of his voice, his hypnotic eyes, the magnetic force of his personality, I wanted nothing more than to be with him right now. Even if, but I could not think it, not here alone in that darkening forest, not while the rain made its dim as twilight on the canopy and pattered like footsteps across the matter earthen floor. I shivered and rose quickly from my place of concealment, worried that somehow the path could have disappeared with the rain. But it was there, safe and clear, winding its way out of the dipping green maze. I followed it hesitantly, my hood pulled close around my face, becoming surprised as I nearly ran through the trees at how far I had come. I started to wonder if I was heading out at all or following the path further into the confines of the forest. Before I could get too panicked, though, I began to glimpse some open spaces through the webbed branches, and then I could hear a car passing on the street, and I was free. Charlie's lawn stretched out in front of me, the house beckoning me, promising warmth and dry socks. It was just noon when I got back inside. I went upstairs and got dressed for the day, jeans and t-shirt. Since I was staying indoors, I don't take too much effort to concentrate on my task for the day, a paper on Macbeth. that was due Wednesday. I settled into outlining a rough draft contently, more scenes than I could felt since. Well, since Thursday afternoon, if I was being honest. That had always been my way, though. Making decisions was the painful part for me, the part I agonized over. But once the decision was made, I simply followed, though, usually with relief that the choice was made. Sometimes the relief was tainted by despair, like my decision to become two folks. But it was still better than whistling with the alternatives. This decision was ridiculous, easy to live with, dangerously easy. And so the day was quite productive. I finished my paper before 8. Charlie came home with a large catch, and I made a mental note to pick up a book of recipe for fish while I was in Seattle next week. The chill that flashed up my spine whenever I thought of the trip were no different than the ones I could left before I have taken my walk with Jacob Black. There should be a different, I thought. I should be afraid. I know I should be, but I could not feel the right kind of fear. I slept dreamlessly that night, exhausted from beginning my day so early and sleeping so poorly the night before. I woke for the second time since arriving in Folks to the bright yellow light of a sunny day. I skipped to the window, stunned to see that there was hardly a cloud in the sky, and so there were just fizzy little white puffs that could not possibly be carrying any rain. I opened the window, surprised when it opened silently without sticking, not having opened it who knows how many years, and sucked it in the relatively dry air. It was neatly warm and hardly windy at all. My blood was electric in my veins. Charlie was finishing breakfast when I came downstairs, and he picked up on my mood immediately. Nice day out, he commented. Yes, I agreed with a grin. He smiled back, his brown eyes crinkling around the edges. When Charlie smiled, it was easier to see when he and my mother had jumped too quickly into the early marriage. Most of the young romantic he could be been in those days had faded before I could know him, as the curly brown hair, the same color, if not the same texture as mine, had drenched, slowly revealing more and more of the shiny skin on his forehead. But when he smiled, I could see a little of the man who had run away with Ren when she was just 2 years older than I was now. I ate breakfast cheerily, watching the dust motels stirring in the sunlight that streamed in the black window. Charlie called out a goodbye, and I heard the crozier pull away from the house. I hesitated on my way to the door, hand on my rain jacket. I could be tempting fate to leave it home. With a sign, I floated it over my arm and stepped out into the brightest light I could see in months. By dint of much elbow grease, I was able to get both windows in the truck almost completely rolled down. I was one of the first ones to school. I had not even checked the clock in my hurry to get outside. I parked and headed towards the seldom used picnic benches on the south side of the cafeteria. The benches were still a little damp, so I sat on my jacket, glad to have a use for it. My homework was done, the product of a slow social life, but there were a few trigonometry problems I was not sure I had right. I took out my book industrially, but halfway through rechecking the first problem, I was daydreaming, watching the sunlight play on the red barked trees. I sketched in alternatively along the margin of my homework. After a few minutes, I suddenly realized I could draw on a 5 pairs of dark eyes starting out of the pages at me. I scrubbed them out with the eraser. Bella. I heard someone call, and it sounded like Mike. I looked around to realize the school had become populated while I had been sitting here, absent minded. Everyone was in t shirts, some even in shorts, though the temperature could not be over 60. Mike was coming towards me in khaki shorts and a stripped ruby shirt, waving. Hey, Mike, I called, waving back, unable to half hearted on a morning like this. He came to sit by me, the tidy spikes of his hair shining golden in the light, his grin stretching across his face. He was so delighted to see me. I could not help but feel grafted. I never noticed before your hair has red in it, he commented, catching between his fingers a strand that was fluttering in the light breeze. Only in the sun. I became just a little uncomfortable as he tucked the lock behind my ear. Great day, is not it? My kind of day. I agreed. What did you do yesterday? His tone was just a bit too property. I mostly worked on my essay. I don't add that I was finished with it. No need to sound smug. He hit his forehead with the heel of his hand. Oh, yeah, that's due Thursday, right? Wednesday, I think. Wednesday? He frowned at. That is not good. What are you writing yours on? Whether Shakespeare's treatment on the female character is mignolist. He started at me like I could just have spoken in pig Latin. I guess I will have to get to work on that tonight. He said, deflated. I was going to ask if you wanted to go out. Oh, I was taken off guard. Why could not I ever had a pleasant conversation with Mike anymore without it getting awkward? Well, we could go to dinner or something, and I could work on it later. He smiled at me hopefully. Mike? I halted, being put on the spot. I don't think that could be the best idea. His face fell. Why? He asked, his eyes guarded. My thoughts flickered to Edward, wondering if there is where his thoughts were as well. I think, and if you ever repeat what I'm saying right now, I will cheerfully beat you to death. I threatened her, but I think that could hurt Jessica's feelings. He was bewildered, obvious, not thinking in that direction at all. Jessica? Really, Mike? Are you blind? Oh, he exhaled, clearly dazed. I took advantage of that to make my escape. It is time for class, and I cannot be late again. I gathered my books up and stuffed them in my bag. We walked in silence to the building 3, and his expression was distracted. I hoped whatever thoughts he was immersed in were leading him in the right direction. When I saw Jessica in technology, she was bubbling with enthusiasm. She, Angelina, and Luran was going to Port Angels tonight to go and dress shopping for the dance, and she wanted me to come too, even though I don't need one. I was indecisive. I could be nice to get out of the town with some girlfriends, but Lauren could be there. And who knew what I could be doing tonight? But that was definitely the wrong path to let my mind wander down. Of course, I was happy about the sunlight, but that was not completely responsible for the erotic mood I was in. Not even close. So I gave her maybe, telling her I could have to talk with Charlie first. She talked of nothing but the dance of the way to Spanish, continuing as if without an interruption when the class finally ended. 5 minutes late, and we were on our way to lunch. I was far too lost in my own fancy of anticipation to notice much of what she said. I was painfully eager to see not just him but all the Gullens, to compare them with the new suspicion that plagued my mind. As I crossed the threshold of the cafeteria, I felt the first true tingle of fear settle down my spine and settle in my stomach. Could they be able to know what I'm thinking? And then a different feeling jolted through me. Could Edward be waiting to sit with me again? As was my routine, I glanced first towards the Cullen's table. A shiver of panic trembled in my stomach as I realized it was empty. With tear-ending hope, my eyes crouched the rest of the cafeteria, hoping to find him alone, waiting for me. The space was nearly filled. Spanish had made us late. But there was no sign of Edward or any of his family. Desolation hit me with crippling strength. I shambled along behind Jessica, not bothering to pretend to listen anymore. We were late enough that everyone was already at our table, avoided the empty chair next to Mike in the favor of one by Angelina. I vaguely noticed that Mike held the chair out politely for Jessica and that her face lit up in response. Angelina asked a few quiet questions about the Macbeth paper, which I answered as naturally as I could while sprawling down in mystery. She too invited me to go with them tonight, and I agreed now, gasping at anything to distract myself. I realized I had been holding on to the last thread of hope when I entered biology, saw his empty seat, and felt a new wave of disappointment. The rest of my day passed slowly, dismally. In gym, we had a lecture on the rules of badminton, the next torture they had lined up for me. But at least it meant I got to sit and listen instead of stumbling around on the court. The best part was the coach don't finish. So I got another day off tomorrow. Never mind that the day after they could warn me with a racket before unleashing me one of the rest of the class. I was glad to leave campus so I could be free to pout and mope before I went out tonight with Jessica and company. But right after I walked into the door of Charlie's house, Jessica called to cancel our plans. I tried to be happy that Mike had asked her out to dinner. I really was relieved that he finally seems to be catching on. But my enthusiasm sounded false in my own ears. She rescheduled our shopping trip for tomorrow's night, which left me with little in the way of distraction. I had fish martini for dinner with a salad and bread left over from the night before. So there was nothing to do there. I spent a focused half hour on homework, but then I was through with that too. I checked my email, reading the backlogs of letters from my mother, getting snippets as they progressed to the present. I signed and typed a quick response. Mom, sorry, have been out. I went to the beach with some friends and I had to write a paper. My excuses were fairly pathetic, so I gave up on that. It is sunny outside, I know. I'm shocked too. So I'm going to go outside and soak up as much as vitamin D as I can. I love you, Bella. I decided to kill an hour with non school related reading. I had a small collection of books that came with me to Folks, the sappiest volume being a complement of the works of Jane Austen. I selected the one and headed to the backyard, grabbing a ragged out quilt from the linen cupboard at the top of the stairs of my own. Outside in Charlie's small square yard, I folded the quilt in half and let it out of the reach of the trees' shadows on the thick lawn that could always be slightly wet, no matter how long the sun shone. I lay on my stomach, crossing my ankles in the air, flipping through the different novels in the book, trying to decide which could occupy my mind the most thoroughly. My favorites were Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility. I could read the first more recently, so I started into Scene and Sensibility, only to remember after I had begun three that the hero of the story happened to be named Edward. Angrily, I turned to Mansfield Park, but the hero of that piece was named Edmund, and that was just too close. Were not there any other names available in the late 18th century? I snapped the book shut, annoyed, and rolled over to my back. I pushed my sleeves up as high as they could go and closed my eyes. I could think of nothing but the warmth on my skin. I told myself severely the breeze was still light, but it blew tendrils of my hair around my face and then tickled a bit. I pulled all my hair over my head, letting it fall fan out on the quilt above me, and focused again on the heat that touched my eyelids, my cheekbones, my nose, and my lips, my forearms, my neck, soaked through my light shirt. The next thing I was conscious of was the sound of Charlie's cruiser turning into the brisk of the driveway. I sat up in surprise, realizing the light was gone behind the trees. I had fallen asleep. I looked around, muffled, with a sudden feeling that I was not alone. Charlie? I asked, but I could hear his door slamming in front of the house. I jumped up, foolishly edgy, gathering the now damp quilt and my book. I ran inside to get some oil heating on the stove, realizing that dinner could be late. Charlie was hanging up in his gun belt and stepping out of his boots when I came in. Sorry, Dad, dinner is not ready yet. I fell asleep outside. I shifted a yawn. Don't worry about it, he said. I wanted to catch the score of the game anyway. I watched TV with Charlie after dinner for something to do. There was not anything on I wanted to watch, but he know I don't like baseball, so he turned it to some mindless sitcom that neither of us enjoyed. He seemed happy though to be doing something together, and it felt good, despite my desperation, to make him happy. Dad, I said during a commercial, Jessica and Angelina are going to look at dresses for the dance tomorrow night in Port Angels, and they wanted me to help them choose. Do you mind if I go with them? Jessica Stanley? He asked. And Angelina Weber. I signed as I gave him the details. He was confused. But you're not going to dance, right? No, Dad, but I'm helping them to find the dresses, giving them constructive criticism. I could not have to explain this to a woman. Well, okay. He seems to realize that he was out of his depth with the girly stuff. It is a school night though. We will leave right after school so we can get back early. You will be okay for dinner, right? Bells. I fed myself for 17 years before you got here. He reminded me. I don't know how you survived. I muttered, then added more clearly. I will leave some things for cold cut sandwiches in the fridge, okay? Right on top. It was sunny again in the morning. I awakened with renewed hope that I glimly tried to suppress. I dressed for the warmer weather in a deep blue v neck blouse, something I could worn in the dead of the winter in Phoenix. I had planned my arrival at school so that I barely had time to make it to class. With a slinking hat, I circled the full lot looking for a space while also searching for the silver Volvo that was clearly not there. I parked in the last row and hurried to English, arriving breathless but subdued before the final bell. It was the same as yesterday. I just could not keep little sprouts of hope from budding in my mind, only to have them squashed painfully as I searched the lunchroom in vain and sat at the empty biology table. The potentials scheme was back on again for tonight and made all the more attractive by the fact that Luran had other obligations. I was anxious to get out of the town so I could stop glancing over my shoulder, hoping to see him appearing out of the blue the way he always did. I vowed to myself that I could be in the good mood tonight and not ruin Angelina's or Jessica's enjoyment in the dress hunting. Maybe I could do a little cloth shopping as well. I refuse to think that I might be shopping alone in Seattle this weekend, no longer interested in the earlier arrangements. Surely he could not cancel without at least telling me. After school, Jessica followed me home in her old white Mercury so that I could ditch my books and truck. I brushed through my hair quickly when I was inside, feeling a silent lift of excitement as I completed getting out of folks. I left a note for Charlie on the table, explaining again where to find dinner, switched my scruffy wallet from my school bag to purse I rarely used, and ran out to join Jessica. We went to Angelina's house next, and she was waiting for us. My excitement increased exceptionally as we actually drove out of the town limits.